In this demo, I will copy a master sketch upside down. This is a common practice, especially when students are starting out. One of the greatest difficulties of drawing accurately is that what we think we know about a subject gets in the way of what we're actually seeing. So, for many centuries, artists have tricked their brain into just focusing on what we're seeing by turning the image they are copying upside down. This tends to make it abstract. Here I'm putting a piece of paper on my drawing that I will be copying, and as my drawing proceeds, I will lower the piece of paper. This allows me to really minimize how much visual information my eyes are taking in. By drawing upside down, we are really just focused on lines and shapes. Students are often very surprised at the good results they get when they draw upside down. This really is because we are divorcing our thinking from what the subject is. Focusing on lines, shapes, and values gives you the most accurate drawings. That's why drawing upside down can be so successful. It really is a form of abstracting your subject. In other words, the more you make it abstract, the less you think about what you know about what the subject is. Paradoxically, the more realistic and accurate your drawing is. Here you can see I am just focusing on that triangular dark shape. I'm not thinking about what it is. It is, in fact, the neck of the portrait of this young girl that I am drawing. But if I start thinking about it in terms of a neck or a chin, a face, eyes, cheekbone, my drawing may very easily start to look a little cartoony as I stop looking at my source photo and just start making it up in my drawing from what I think I know or what I remember of those objects. By drawing upside down, I'm forced to continually go back to my source image to be sure I'm copying it correctly. Once you have more experience, you won't have to turn your drawings upside down to draw them accurately. And that is because you will have mastered this idea of abstracting the form. You will no longer need to really trick your brain like we are doing here. With experience, you'll learn to just focus on these shapes. Here you just saw me line up my pencil with where that white paper is and making sure that I'm staying in alignment. It's very common for a drawing to grow as we move down the page. By keeping that white piece of paper there, I'm making sure that I am drawing what I'm seeing at the same place. Here I'm using a kneaded eraser. This is a common eraser for artists to use. One nice thing about it is that if you're trying to erase a strange shape, you can really mold that eraser into whatever shape you need. Here I'm using my pencil to verify measurements. I recommend just using your pencil and not a ruler. By using the pencil to assess my measurements, I'm really training myself to observe the measurements. If I use a ruler, in a way it's sort of lazy observation. I'm just training myself to use a ruler well. I'm still not entirely sure what I'm drawing here, but I'm just plodding along, drawing the lines that I see, and making sure I'm staying in alignment and proportional. You can see my head here bopping back and forth. That's really because my eyes keep going from the drawing I'm copying to the drawing I'm making. I'm constantly scanning back and forth with slow observation to make sure that I'm staying on track and observing closely. Here I'm drinking some water. I guess it's important to stay hydrated. Here I'm using my pencil to measure that angle of her chin. and then back to slow observations. If I push myself, I can start to make out what objects I'm actually drawing. But your drawing will be more accurate if you don't do that, if you just stick to this idea of abstract shapes. Here I'm doing some quick shading. My piece of paper tells me that all these shapes line up where that white piece of paper meets them. So I'm making sure that on my drawing, all those shapes also line up at the same point. As you get your drawing done, you can consider if you want to wait until the drawing is completely finished before you turn it right side up, or if you're fine turning it right side up once you have the majority of your shapes in. And you can finish off the final details right side up. In addition to looking for where my lines should go, you can see me shading in a little bit. I'm starting to get some of the values that I see in the drawing, but I'm really not going in for the darkest darks. Not yet. If I have to erase anything, it gets hard to erase really dark marks, so I'd rather keep it light for now. Here I'm lining up where things align vertically, not just horizontally. As I finish a piece, I drop down that white piece of paper, maybe another ½ inch or an inch more, so that I can see more of the drawing I'm copying. I've sped up this video so you don't have to spend the entire time that it took me to draw this watching me. The actual drawing took about 45 minutes total, which means I was drawing much more slowly than what you see here. It's important to really slow down your observation. To draw accurately, we tend to think that it's about our hand-eye coordination, but the biggest obstacle is actually really slow, deep observation. You have hand-eye coordination if you can sign your name on a line. That's really all the hand-to-eye coordination you need. What you really want to develop is a patience for slow looking. I find that one of the greatest joys of drawing is, in fact, giving myself the gift of time to really observe my subject. I'm almost at the top of the head. And at this point, even upside down, it's not entirely clear that I'm drawing a head, which is good. That's really part of the point of doing this, is to trick my brain as long as I can. Once I'm finished capturing the major shapes, I will turn my drawing upside down to finish it off. I'm using a fairly light pencil. It's a 2H or an HB or an F. Works really well for these initial stages. Your B pencils have more charcoal in them, which means you will get darker lines from them, but they are softer, so they'll smear a lot. I don't like to use the darker pencils until I'm towards the end of my drawing to avoid smearing. I feel like I have enough of the drawing done that I can now work upside right. And I am just going to continue the same idea. My eyes are constantly scanning between the copy I'm working from and my drawing. And now I'm really looking for the smallest nuances of the thickness or the thinness of each line, how big a shape is, how dark it is, what angle it's at. And I'm just slowly working my way around the image. I'll also start shading in the darker shapes. It's really fascinating to me whenever I do a portrait how just the smallest little increment off of the mouth or the nose or the chin will give the subject a completely different profile or emotional expression. So I'm trying to pay attention to capturing that as well. I'm also paying attention to how thick or thin the original artist's lines are so that I can imitate those. Thicker lines command more of our attention. Thinner lines tend to imply that light is hitting an area, such as the top of her nose. With hair, the tendency would probably be to start thinking about drawing every strand of hair, but that never really looks like hair. That ends up looking like spaghetti. What you want to do is the shapes of light and dark, just as we do on her face. That sort of general shading gives us a much more accurate look of hair. Should always feel free to turn your page around to better suit your wrist and your hand movements. When you turn your drawing page around, be sure that you also turn your resource image to the same angle so that your eyes can still keep going back and forth and checking that things are staying aligned vertically and horizontally. Now that I am close to the finish, I'm getting a little bit bolder with darker marks. It's really fun when you start adding the values, things start to look much more three-dimensional. Therefore, it's tempting to do this early on, but I really try to wait till the end of my drawings to get to this point, because if I recognize I've made mistakes, it's really hard to start erasing those dark lines. The same is true for any details in the drawing. I save those until I'm towards the end. I would be reluctant to erase details I had spent a lot of time putting in, even if they were inaccurate. As I am now towards the end of the drawing, I'm definitely drilling into the smaller details. With the shading, it's hard to see a lot of values when you first start out drawing. I think when I first started drawing, I either just saw things as light or dark. I think a good way to go is if you can at least find three values, the lightest, a middle, and a dark. That would be enough to give things a three-dimensional look. For the lightest value, I just use the white of the paper. In this case, it's a creamy paper. That is my lightest value. All the shading I do until the end is going to be in the medium value. And then I come in towards the end and really darken up those middle areas that need to get darker. I'm using that kneaded eraser to pull out some of the highlights from her hair. Please know that drawing is partly making lines with your pencil and partly erasing them. So many times students are reluctant to use their eraser, thinking that it just means that they're making a lot of mistakes. But I think erasing is just part of how drawings happen. We can also use our erasers to lift out lighter areas. The kneaded eraser is not great for trying to erase down to the white of the paper if you made a real mistake. It's really better for lifting and for small areas. If you need to get down to the white of the paper and erase all the lines you made, I would use a hard white eraser. Even though I'm towards the end of the drawing, I am still constantly going back and forth between my drawing and the original that I'm copying. As I darken in the darkest areas, I might notice that the tones that are middle have to get darker as well. It's hard to really know if your middle tones are dark enough until you start adding your darkest tones. Then you have a good comparison. This would be a good point to also reach for a darker pencil, bumping up to a B. If you're light-handed, you might really want to get a higher numbered B, a 3 or a 4 or 5B. But I'm pretty heavy-handed, so a 2B is usually dark enough for me. There I was just using my pencil to check the angle between her pulled up hair and her back. Make sure that I'm staying on track. It's tempting to just go in and draw very darkly right from the start, especially those areas that we see dark. But your drawing will be much more satisfying to you and more successful if you're willing to build up to those darks. I'm getting really close to finishing here. The light's a little bit harsh on this drawing, so at the end I'll put an image of my finished drawing without the harsh light on it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how drawing upside down can help you become more accurate in seeing shapes and lines and values. Thank you for watching.